Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Eric Deggans, TV critic for National Public Radio, and your host for today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce actors Harold Perrineau, Catalina Sandino Moreno, and Eion Bailey from. In From. How about that?
Well, it's all tricky.
We really appreciate you joining us for this conversation. So Harold, like the last time we talked, it was for this retrospective on Oz. This show is a very different kind of animal here. Can you, I know this is quite a challenge, but can you explain the premise of this show to the people who are watching, and then talk a little bit about your character, Boyd, Sheriff Stephens?
Sure. This is pretty easy. So the three of us, Catalina, Eion, and I, are in a show where people arrive in a town, and once they arrive in the town, they are trapped in the town. And when you are trapped in the town, you are hunted at night by some type of creatures. That is sort of the premise of our show. And how you live and or survive in that town is really sort of the meat of what holds it together. Even though our show is billed as a horror, it really is about the drama of the people trying to survive and figure out their lives. I'm sure each of my fellow castmates will tell you about their stories, but I play a character. His name is Boyd Stevens, and Boyd Stevens is the sheriff of the town, and he is tasked with, maybe personally tasked with, trying to find a way to get everyone out of that town as safely as possible. Unfortunately, he isn't able to find a way out of that town yet.
All right. Now, Catalina, you play the mother in a family that sort of arrives there as new arrivals. You know, they're driving through the town and then suddenly realize they can't get out. And she's not particularly getting along with Eion/Jim. So talk a little bit about your character and her relationship to the husband and all the friction that we get to see when you guys land in this kind of impossible situation.
I mean, it doesn't mean that, she's not getting along with the husband. Is that she has a background where, there's a lot of things happening in her life that led up to that moment of not connecting with the husband. And I think being stuck in that town, they have to just make things happen, talk, and resolve things as a family, as everyone should be. But before they get stuck, it was difficult for them to just get to those moments of, you're stuck in that town, you have to make it work. So, through the first season, you see them trying to make it work.
All right. And Eion, when I started watching this show, your character, I was afraid he was going to be sort of that stereotypical kind of lunk-headed dad / husband. But, we get to see a few more layers of him as the episodes kind of unfold. Can you talk a little bit about Jim and sort of his attitude when the family lands there and how that evolves over the course of the episodes that are out now?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. As Catalina mentioned, we've just been, as a couple, saddled with an unbearable loss of a family member. And for any couple, any married couple to ever get over a tragedy like these two have had happen to them is a miracle if they can get through it. And they are actively working towards it every day, and they have two children remaining that they need to raise up and keep sane and healthy, and ourselves sane. And then we get stuck in this nightmare experience, and there seems to be a moment of where this couple can collapse under the pressure of it all, because they already their structures are marriage structures, family structures already fractured. They can either collapse or become stronger and make that wound heal over and have a bond that can never be broken. And I think that's what they both are making an attempt to do. And how they get out of this place is the game. So that, speaking of layers, I guess it's the regular like lunk-headed dad probably wouldn't have those wounds that he's struggling with. He's like, hey, Sammy, let's go play some ball, and I'm going to drive you to, soccer practice. And did you do your homework today? These are extraordinary circumstances. So whatever a man is in his everyday life, he's going to be asked to do, go above and beyond to the extremes. And that's something I really appreciate about this show. It looks at all relationships from all the characters in the story, just in heightened circumstances. So you get to really see these people at their extremes, which is both exciting and psychologically really interesting.
Yeah, as a parent of children myself, you think about times when you may have been in a situation where your kids were in danger, where you all were in danger, and you want to protect them, and then you're watching a show like this, where this couple's facing sort of the ultimate version of that, where if the kids sneak out in the dark, they could be slaughtered. So how did you guys, both of you, Catalina and Eion, how did you figure out how to play that, and how each of your characters would sort of fit into that dynamic of trying to protect the children, but also having a hard time figuring out how to work together?
I'm always trying to, and I want to improve on it more, even for the second season, is to make it as real as possible, to make these circumstances feel as real and really breathe it and live it and experience it. Because we can all extrapolate, just as you mentioned, like what it is to be a father, to have children, and what you would do to protect your family. And then as this story unfolds through the first season, you see how we're not only interested in protecting the family, but there are bonds that are created with the characters in the story and in this town. And we all have shared interests and desires to live and to love again and be away from this place. So we unite to figure a way out of here and use all of our skills and expertise to do that.
Yeah,
so for me, it's about grounding and how to continue to ground into that reality and make it real.
Right. Catalina, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I feel that as a parent that have lost a child, in the story, I think her main concern is her two remaining children, and she just goes into mom mode, and her main purpose is to take care of those two kids and to protect them and to kind of like bubble wrap them, because she failed with one. She doesn't want to fail with those two. And, she's aware of what's happening out there, and she wants to shelter, her eldest, but she also has to understand, I think at the later on the season, you just see her understanding that, she's not a baby anymore, that she takes decisions for herself and she has to let go. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful moment. And in real life, for every parent, when you start feeling that your child is pushing you, you just have to leave that. You just have to give them space, and you raise them and you hope that they're making the right decisions, and you just have to let go. But I think for Tabitha, it's a little bit difficult to let go because she just went through this very traumatic experience with her baby. And I feel that she is not feeling the greatest mother. So she's really trying to be the best she can, and she's trying to protect the children, and she's trying to shelter them in their house, as safe as possible.
That makes sense. So Harold, and I'm sure you've sort of heard this comparison before. A lot of people are comparing this show to another sort of supernaturalist show that you were in, Lost. And the thing that strikes me, like the commonality between the two shows, is that there's a mystery that's sort of slowly being unfolded for the audience. And the key is to sort of keep the audience engaged while you're slowly revealing what's actually going on, so that people don't sort of get tired of, not knowing, but they, stay engaged in what you're doing. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the story does that, how From does that, and how you walk that line of, you don't want to reveal too much, but you want to reveal enough that people stay involved in the storytelling.
Right. Well, I can really only talk about it just a little bit because, my job is to get there and act it. But we have three fantastic people, Jack Bender, John Griffin, and Jeff Pinkner, who are helming our show and really putting it all together. And I think Jack and Jeff, who worked on Lost as well, really understand how to put a story together that really talks about the human struggle. Like you were just talking about, this family struggle with their children. I have a struggle with my own children. Other people have struggles with lost loved ones, sisters or brothers or lovers or something. And those human parts of the story are things that really, really keep us engaged in it. And then once you put any one of those elements in some sort of danger, and in this sense, it's, flesh-eating monsters, then the stakes are become really, really interesting. But I think you keep people together by constantly investing in the human qualities that are there. You constantly invest in the connections that they're making while they are in this town together, the connections that they had before, the human beings that they are trying to survive in these really, really tough times. And, and I think, as audience members right now in particular can all understand, fighting some unseen monster while you are sequestered in your home is something that's really compelling for everybody right now. And so I think that, our three showrunners, as it were, do a really good job and will continue to do a good job of crafting stories around that, like the human element of it.
Yeah, there's a certain allegory to a certain pandemic that we're going through, maybe. Well, and I was wondering, now that I didn't realize that a couple of the guys who were working on this were also on Lost. Was there any concern when you heard the idea for the show about returning to a type of a show that you'd already done? Or was the concept different enough that you didn't have any concerns about that?
Well, originally, I had zero concerns about it. Jack and Jeff had concerns about it. they were originally like, no, not him. Let's get somebody else.
Did you have to fight? Did you have to convince them?
I had to have a little conversation. We had to talk about it quite a bit because they didn't want the comparisons either. Do you know what I mean? And then eventually we all figured out, like, the comparisons are going to come no matter what. We just have to do our best at telling this story that we have presently. And I think, I'm really grateful that they entrusted me with the character Boyd, and I get to trust them with telling the story. And I think it's working out really well for all of us.
We're grateful as well, Harold.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you that too. In one level, it's such a sort of fantastical story. Like, what did you think when you heard about this, and what made you think, hey, this is something that I think maybe I could do something with?
I had major reservations about doing horror. I had made a decision at some point in my life. I was like, I'm never going to do horror. I'm just not going to do it. But I had this idea that it's, I had it kind of in a category of Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and slasher movies and in any of those things. And when I read this, I saw that it clearly was not that. And then to not quite my surprise, because you could really feel it in the writing in the first couple of episodes that we read before taking it on. But there's so much heart in this story. There's so much love expressed, which is just like really the perfect balance, counterweight to the violence. And to me, it's really my favorite element of the show. How much heart is at the core of it. It's not a cold and cynical piece. It's and then it's when you get to meet and experience the people who wrote it and who, as Harold was talking about, John and Jack and Jeff, you see what gems of human beings they are, and then the cast members that they populated the show with are all big-hearted performers who bring so much to it, so much that is that leaps beyond the page and makes it, I think, where you really care about these people. And it becomes not a story where you root for them to die. where it's they're like, oh God, I hope the monster kills that person immediately. They're so annoying, or awful human beings. But it's I think a different kind of tale that way. Maybe you're rooting for these people to live. That's sure what it feels like so far.
Yeah, that's great. And Catalina, particularly because we're doing this for SAG-AFTRA, I'm really interested, in what you first thought when you first heard about it, but also how you sort of built up your character. How do you, once you decide you're going to sign on, and you're going to do this, and you're presented with this person, how do you make them a person? How do you figure out how to play this woman in a way that's believable and real?
I think Harold was saying that, this show is not just a horror show. And I think Eion just, say the same thing. And it's not a horror show when you read it. Yeah, there's like monsters, like, we don't know who they are. But really is, for especially for my character and her situation, is the drama between these people. Is like what would happen? I have a kid. What would happen if he dies? I mean, like, what would happen when he would I go crazy? Would I not? I mean, like, how in real life would you deal with something like this with your partner? How is your family? How is it going to come out the other way? So it was very intriguing. It was very interesting. In that part, it was challenging, and I'm always looking for that challenge in every project, I think. And just talking to Jack and just talking about the character. I mean, like, I wanted her to be as real as possible. I wanted her to feel, I want people to feel the pain that she was going through. I wanted for the audience to see that this family was hurting. So it was just a conversation with the writers and the producers, which every time I talked to them, I approached them, they were very welcoming. And we could sit and talk and through dinner about, what the character should do and what the character, would say. And it was very collaborative, which I'm very thankful that happened, because that made everything come up in a very organic way.
I'm wondering if there was a scene or a moment in any of the episodes that sort of came out of those conversations where you could say, we talked about X, and then here's how you can see it on the screen.
I mean, literally, I talked to them about every single scene. I am so invested in this character. I really like her. I really find her strong. I mean, like, she's a very strong woman. She loves her family, and she's dealing with this immeasurable pain that I don't know what kind of parent can go through that pain without falling apart. And she's not. On the contrary, she's taking strength from that. It has so many contradictions, which makes the character so interesting for me. So basically, like, scenes with Julie, like, I was very concerned with how her relationship with Julie was going to be. I wanted to be, she cannot be the typical American adolescent that she just, complains about everything. She has to have, and their conversations have to be a little bit more in depth. And I think you see that by the end of the season, their dialogue is much more, like a grown up. Like, they're talking, she's not talking with her like a baby, she's not sheltering her so much. And I think that's kind of like the progression that I think it's beautiful to see. And which, I'm doing with my own child right now. It's more like, okay, I'm letting go, but I'm letting go, let's just try to see what kind of volume we put in this relationship. And it's going to change, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be a different kind of relationship. But that's kind of like the progression that I wanted to have, especially with Julie. I want that mother-daughter relationship to be shaped nicely.
Yeah. And, you find that in families that have gone through trauma, especially, like, the kids have to step up. So that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
So So, Harold, one thing I wanted to ask you is the character that you're playing is this heroic figure, and we often don't necessarily get to see Black men cast in this kind of role where they're the central hero. And I was wondering if that had to be an attraction to the role. Could you talk a little bit about that and whether you think you're breaking some boundaries by playing this character in the way that you're playing it?
That's a really interesting question. Eion said this a little while earlier. He said, not only do we have great writers and directors and all that stuff, but they brought in this really, really dynamic cast of people. And as you were listening to Catalina talk and Eion talk, what we've all done is we brought our own backgrounds to, each one of these characters to actually make them like live in a way. So, and interestingly enough, am I breaking any boundaries for myself as being a hero? I feel like a bit of a hero in my own life because I got to take care of these girls at home every day. Like I got to, not like pat myself on the back, but it's a lot of work, man. You know what I mean? But you bring all of that into the thing. And so for me, it doesn't break any boundaries, but while I recognize though for other people, and as we know really, really well, that representation is really important, which is why all of these characters bringing their background and who they are, where they're from is really important. And so I'm really happy to be able to bring that in that sense that you're right. We don't necessarily get to see that much. And he's like a hero, anti-hero. He has the full authority to be good and bad, and we still kind of root for him, and that I love about the character. But like I said, for me, it's not necessarily a revelation because it feels every day. But but I do understand in the broader sense, we don't get to see that, and I'm really happy that I'm getting this opportunity to do that for people who haven't gotten a chance to see that. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And from my, I'm old enough to have watched, the old disaster movies, and there was always Charlton Heston, and that was always, it's great. Those actors were wonderful, but to see a Black man in that role, means a little something. And
and I don't die first. What?
Exactly.
It does.
Is white. Wow. Look at how far we've come. If we had time, I'd tell you a story about watching Capricorn 1, where a Black person is the first person to get killed in that movie. But anyway, and now I got to ask, a serious question. So forgive me for this, but the stakes are high, and right at the beginning of the show, we see, a child get killed and her mother get killed, and we're at a point, and in some ways this is coincidence, but it's the world that we live in. We're talking a lot about violence on television, and we're talking a lot about depictions of violence on television. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. I mean, we don't, a lot of the violence on your show is suggested, but when you do go there, you do go there. So can you talk a little bit about bringing that kind of imagery to television? And is there any concern in this current climate about, crossing a line? How do you guys make sure that you're not crossing a line?
Sorry, is that for Harold, or I could speak?
Yeah,
okay. In a Rambo film, Rambo mows down Vietnamese people with a machine gun 50 at a time. We know nothing about these people, nothing about their lives, their families, why Rambo's even there killing all of them, really. We don't really understand what that's all about, other than a very simple narrative we've all been told. But they all die, and their life means nothing. To contrast that, you take somebody like David Cronenberg is good at this. He does Eastern Promises, and as an example of one of his films, where when you see violence in a film like his, it is true and real, and it has cost. And people die in a grasping for their last breath, fighting with everything they have, and the life goes out of them only after they've fought for everything to stay alive. And this show leans in that direction. People desperately want to live. You know something about who they are, and you know something about the cost because you see it. Like, for example, there's a beautiful scene where father, I hope it's not a spoiler. Anyways, the character dies, and Harold holds him. And it's a real loving, tender scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives respect to what this act of death and giving up this life is, and pays it homage. And therefore it has real value because the importance is understood of what life is for all of us. And so to me, when because violence is of course a part of life, when violence is portrayed as it truly is for the real cost, then at least it's honest. And we're examining something that is real and true, as opposed to superfluous and something for titillating, just for entertainment value.
Yeah, that makes sense. Making you feel the cost of a death, lends a lot of perspective there. Anybody else have thoughts?
I just think that, we're storytellers, right? And in stories, you need to tell. There are the reason that we're listening to the stories is because we're trying to put ourselves quite often in the story and like, what would I do? How would I be? And there has to be real consequences. And like Eion just said, there are real human beings, and they're not just we're not just being they're not blatantly just violence for violence sake. You know what I mean? That they actually have repercussions and cost, and this heroism sometimes and cowardice and all of these different things in the service of telling a story, which goes back generations. Generations. What am I talking about? Since the beginning of humankind, telling stories. We love to tell stories and entertain each other. And so for me in this sort of thing, I feel like in this show we have violence and there are costs. But they all go to serve this other greater thing, which is about human survival and the human spirit. And so it's not just, again, like violence for violence sake. You know what I mean? You wouldn't want to. There's nobody who's going to go out and buy a monster mask and then start eating people's flesh. So where other things.
Let's hope not.
And feel like you can empowered to do something else. That's all I'm saying. I'm a little frustrated. Sorry.
No. That's great, and that makes a lot of sense. And in particular, the death that I talked about that happens at the very beginning of the show not only sets up the stakes of the series, but we get to see what kind of leader Boyd is. Because of how he responds to it and how he deals with the father who survives. So all of that is really important. It makes sense. I was kind of wondering too, Boyd has a strained relationship with his son. And so there's a lot of sort of family dynamics that are playing out in this series. Could you talk a little bit about Boyd's strained relationship with his son and how that plays into how the show itself is talking about family and parents and kids and that kind of thing?
Right. Well, you have, like I said, there are lots of dynamics. You have Kata and Eion's family, and you have my family. That's a real strain. That's a real dynamic, actually, among men in many people's lives, mine included. I have a real difficulty, or had a real difficulty with my father, and for the reasons that I had them, they're different than Boyd and Ellis have them. But those underpinnings are things that are really, really real. And so in the very beginning, you see this real strain between these two men, older and younger. And then during, as the story goes on, you get to see why that strain is there and why that struggle is there. And then you get to see them find a place to reconcile. And for me, it feels like a beautiful thing. It also feels like wish fulfillment, like I think many people want to find a way to reconcile with their parents if they can. And so for me, it's a really great story, and it's a great story to tell and a journey to follow that I think many people they have some history with, difficulty with their parents, and so I love being able to tell that story.
Definitely. Well, it's interesting. We alluded a little bit to how the story itself could be an allegory for the pandemic that we're facing. And that's the interesting thing to me about the actual show. That's like what the actual show's about too. All these people who are kind of forced into this crisis situation, and then they have to work together. And I'm wondering what you think the show kind of says about that, about what it takes to prevail when you have all these sort of differing, sometimes friction. There's a little friction there amongst all these different kind of people, but they're forced to work together.
Yeah, it makes me think democracy is not easy. It's not, you have to work at it and you have to own it. And there are very differing perspectives, and you could be, you could just constantly fight those perspectives, or you could try to find a way through it together. And that's really what the show is about as well. You have these two different perspectives, even on our show, one at the Colony House, which is a more of a live for the moment and let's, do what we can, in another, part of the town where we have all these restrictive rules. And then somehow we all then have to merge and figure it out again together. And democracy is hard, and it depends on if that's what you want or don't. And I think our show does it. I think we're doing it in our world right now. It's hard and either worth it or not. I think it's worth it, but depends, on who you are. You may or may not think that.
And the parallels are really there. The allegory of people being locked in their homes because there is an all-pervasive monster that wants to feed on your energy and terrorize you is ripe allegory for the times. You can certainly not fault people for seeing these things in it. I don't know if that's what John the writer intended or not, but it's definitely there. And as Harold mentioned, how do we all come together? People from all these different walks of life and different classes and different races come together and to achieve the goal of surviving this terror that is outside. And we don't know exactly why or what it wants, but we know it wants to destroy us. It wants to destroy humanity, it seems. How do we beat it?
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, it's an allegory for a lot of things, right? So I'm wondering, now the show's kind of been out there, if you've heard any theories from fans about what exactly is happening, and what's maybe the craziest thing you've heard from people who are watching the show, who are theorizing about what this force is, or what's going on here, or what's the weirdest thing you've heard?
Gotcha.
No, I haven't heard anything. I haven't read anything.
I don't know if you guys do this, but when I hear fan theory, I just go like, no.
Yeah, no,
sorry, I can't.
I mean, like my kid has some theories, which I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's something like I have to do with the lighthouse, because remember in that first few episodes, you hear that sound and then Harold goes to the woods and then that's the same sound you hear. So you're the key of something. I'm like, listen, just keep going at it. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even remember that episode that you heard that sound and then you connect those two and then the lighthouse. No, remember that. He's very passionate. I bet there's people that are as passionate as he is with all these theories. But aside from him, I haven't heard anything that I'm like, maybe. I have no idea.
I love that those elements are in the show. I think they're called Easter eggs. The plants that are, a couple episodes back that pay off later. I mean, they're diligent about that. Now, so when we're working, I'm always feeling that everything is by design, that every element of production design, of costume, always prepared like, oh, this is meant to be this way. And it has a reason, which is a heck of a lot of fun to be in that world because it's so well orchestrated.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Harold, you've been And you've been in the Matrix, where fans just go nuts about that stuff.
Right. Yeah. I could be like, get out of here. I don't know. But I literally have family members that are like, hey, man, listen, I got a thought for you. Okay. Go ahead, I guess. My father-in-law actually has a whole theory that and actually it's not a terrible one, about the beginning and the end of the Civil War, where it took place, some names, and we had to start doing some research. And I was like, you know what, man, I can't lie, that's not a bad theory. I don't know if he's right or not, but it's not a bad theory. So I feel like they're coming from all over the place, and I wish I could ignore them, but I can't walk in my own door without hearing them.
Yeah, it sounds like your family members are like the most avid theorists out there.
I mean, the show is good when your family members don't even talk to you like you're you. They're like, listen, when Boyd does this thing, let me tell you, man, it's like, I'm Boyd. I know. I'm there. So.
Exactly. Well, at least you know the show's working, right?
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious, if have the producers explained to any of you like what's going on, or did you just want to learn as you read the script?
Oh, guys, I don't know if they told you, but they told me everything. I'm sorry to drop this on this experience now, but I do know everything now.
Well,
so you're the one we got to come after?
Know it all. I can't. I'm sworn to secrecy, but I know.
That's pretty funny. Like,
And it's where you're flipping through the script just to see if you're still alive. This seems like the kind of series where anybody could go.
I guess there is that element too.
I went through that on Oz and Lost. You took the pages and woo. Okay. One more paycheck.
One more.
That's right. Daddy's got some kids to raise. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And make sure to check out the details for giving in the link below. Thank you so much.
We're grateful for your time. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yes, Eric. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.